So for evolution to happen, there has to be variations between the organisms. Single step mutation that occurs in a particular population leading to variation or speciation, we call it as saltation. The total number of genes and their alleles in a particular population remains a constant right from one generation to another, maintaining genetic equilibrium. Mutation can also cause a lot of alteration in the current species as well as the generation of the species. Hello everyone, a warm welcome to this session for class 12 CBSE. I'm Dr. Divya, biology faculty. So in this session of chapter 6, that is evolution, we shall learn about the mechanism of evolution and about Hardy-Weinberg's principle for evolution. So to begin with, let's learn about the mechanism of evolution, wherein we'll learn about what is the origin of variation and how does speciation occur. So for evolution to happen, there has to be variations between the organisms, and those variations will often lead to the formation of new species which have some or the other variation when compared to the ancestors, leading to speciation or the formation of new species. So in the principles of inheritance and variation chapter, you have heard about the biologist or the father of genetics, that is Gregor John Mendel, right? So Mendel, he has talked about inheritable factors which influence phenotype. So what do we mean by phenotype? Phenotype are the external characteristics of an organism or the morphology of an organism. So when you look at an organism, what is the color of the organism? What is the shape of the organism? What is its size? How many fingers it has? So what is the structure of the leaf? So all that, for example, is the morphology of the organism, which we call it as the phenotype. So the phenotype from one individual to another, or it can be carried from one individual to another through certain things which he called them as factors, because at that time Mendel didn't call those factors as genes. So he gave them the name as factors which are inherited by the progeny from the parents. So Darwin ignored these observations, or he kept silent. That is, Darwin didn't pay attention to the theory of Mendel, and Hugo de Vries, based on his work on evening primrose, he brought forth the idea of mutation, and these mutations creates a large difference arising suddenly in a population, and he believed that it is the mutation which causes evolution and not the minor variations that Darwin had talked about. So Darwin talked about minor variations. Say for example, Darwin talked about the finches, wherein there was just a minor variation in the beaks of the finches. But the finches, the species were the same. They were the finches. But that alone doesn't prove the theory of evolution, and that was put forward by Hugo de Vries. So Hugo de Vries, he supported Mendel's theory, saying that genes or factors play a very, very important major role in evolution and also in creating new species. So to explain that, he took a particular flower as an example, that is a flowering plant by the name evening primrose. So this evening primrose plant is capable of changing its color. Morning it is a different color and evening it is a different color. And this change in the color is especially due to mutation or variation occurring in the gene. And this mutation, and when he studied about this mutation or variation in the genes, he got to know that sudden mutation or change in the gene in a particular population can lead to evolution and can also lead to variation among different organisms in that particular population, leading to the creation of new species, which we term it as speciation. So this is about the origin of variation and how speciation occurs. So therefore, speciation can happen not just because of some minor changes in the organism, but speciation or variation in a particular population of organism, it happens because of great changes in the genes or the mutation of the genes, according to what Hugo de Vries said based on the work of Mendel and based on his work as well. Next, mutations. So mutations are random and directional. directionless, while Darwinian variations are small and directional. So mutations can happen in any organism that is present in a population. We can't say that only this particular organism can be subjected to mutation, but Darwin's theories always it is directional. So Darwin's theory doesn't prove that mutation is only directional. So Darwin believes that mutation is only direction, and he also believes that variations in a population are quite small and negligible. But according to Hugo de Vries, mutations are quite random. So any organism in the population can undergo mutation, and it is directionless as well. And evolution for Darwin was gradual, while the evolution theories put forth by Hugo de Vries believe that mutation caused speciation, and hence it is called as saltation. So Darwin said that evolution is a gradual process, which is true because evolution doesn't happen because of gene mutation. Gene mutation usually it is very fast when compared to evolution. So according to Darwin, evolution happened because of again mutation or changes occurring in the gene itself, but that change is quite slow is what Darwin says. But according to Hugo de Vries, he believed that mutation in a particular population occurs all of a sudden, and that sudden mutation in a particular population leading to variation or speciation in that particular population, he called it as saltation. So saltation means single step mutation. Say for example, in one generation the mutation of the organism has happened. So the next coming generation, if the mutation is carried forward, there is a new species that will get formed. So it is a single step mutation. But according to Darwin, the mutation was a very long process. The genes from generation to generation, they underwent minor changes to result in a larger mutation. Say for example, the evolution of we human beings was not all of a sudden in a day, right? It took thousands to thousands of years for the genes of the monkeys or the primates to change gradually into the present day humans we are, and still today mutations are happening in our body very gradually, and mutations needs to be gradual itself, otherwise it can lead to a lot of disorders also in our body, right? So these are some of the theories or ideologies put forward by various scientists. So here we have discussed about the ideas of Darwin and Hugo de Vries based on variation and speciation in a particular population. So here you need to remember what is saltation. Saltation means sudden change or single step mutation that occurs in a particular population leading to variation or speciation. We call it as saltation. So this is a very important MCQ, need to remember that. So studies in population genetics later brought out some clarity. So always studying the genetics or genes of a particular organism in a particular population, which results in variation and speciation, always gives us a correct idea how exactly mechanism of evolution happened on this planet. So talking about the next topic, it is Hardy-Weinberg's principle. So Hardy and Weinberg, two scientists, they actually gave an expression to find out the frequency of occurrence of alleles or gene or a locus in a particular population. So how many times the same genes, because same genes will give rise to similar organisms in a population. So how many types of same genes, how many types the repetition of the genes in a particular population of organism, the frequency can be calculated by Hardy-Weinberg's equilibrium or Hardy-Weinberg's principle. So this frequency of the occurrence of genes or allele in a particular population is supposed to remain fixed or constant according to Hardy-Weinberg's principle. So they said that the frequency of change of alleles of gene or a locus in a particular population needs to be fixed until certain generations, and Hardy-Weinberg principle stated it using algebraic equations. So this principle, that is Hardy-Weinberg principle or Hardy-Weinberg's equilibrium, it says that the allelic frequency in a population are stable and it is constant from one generation to another. So are the allelic frequency constant from one generation to another? No, it cannot be constant, right? It can change, and that change is required for variation in a population to happen. So to prove that the allelic frequency in a population are quite constant and stable, Hardy-Weinberg used mathematical expressions or algebraic equations to prove that. How was it done? We shall look into. So what is the algebraic equation Hardy and Weinberg followed? We will look into. So here, before moving on to that, before talking about the frequency of the genes in a population, we need to know about the gene pool. So what is gene pool? So gene pool, all these are important MCQs that can be asked. So gene pool, the total number of genes and their alleles in a population, we call it as gene pool. So according to Hardy and Weinberg, a equilibrium need to be attained between the organisms in a particular population, and if that equilibrium needs to be attained, then it should be constant. So the gene pool remains a constant. According to Hardy and Weinberg, the total number of genes and their alleles in a particular population remains a constant right from one generation to another, maintaining genetic equilibrium. And they also stated that the sum total of all the allelic frequencies should be 1. So different allelic frequencies will be present in a group of organism in a particular population. When we add them or when we calculate them, it should always be constant, and that constant is 1. It should always be equal to 1, which is not quite possible. And individual frequencies, for example, he named it as P, Q, etc. So this is, we're talking about the equation that Hardy and Weinberg followed to calculate the equilibrium or consistency of a gene in a particular population from one generation to another. So in a diploid organism, that is 2N, P and Q represents the frequency. So what is it? P and Q represents the frequency of allele A and allele A. That is the dominant allele A and recessive allele small letter a. So he represented it by the alphabets P and Q. So the frequency of AA individuals in population. So you have studied in principles of inheritance and variation. We always represent genes by writing 2 alleles for it, right? So here it is AA and here it will be AA. So this will be PP, this will be QQ. Therefore, it will be P square and it will be Q square. So what did Hardy and Weinberg state? The sum of alleles in a population, that is dominant allele and recessive alleles, P square plus Q square, it is always in equilibrium wherein it attains a constant 1 from one generation to another. So this is Hardy-Weinberg's equation. P square plus Q square is equal to 1, or we can write it as P plus Q whole square is equal to 1, which is P square plus 2PQ plus Q square is equal to 1. So this is Hardy-Weinberg's equation. P square plus 2PQ plus Q square is equal to 1. So this is about Hardy-Weinberg's equation wherein he considered 2 genes, capital A, dominant, and recessive, small letter a, which he represent the dominant gene with P and the recessive gene or allele with Q, and always genes are represented in doubles. So therefore, homozygous dominant, homozygous recessive, which he represented as PPQQ. Therefore, it is P plus Q the whole square, and he said that they are always constant. So therefore, it is equal to 1, and it is attaining equilibrium, which is equal to 1. Therefore, P square plus 2PQ plus Q square is equal to 1. And this remains constant throughout generation wherein it will attain equilibrium. And this decides how much evolutionary change has taken place in a particular group of organisms. So this Hardy-Weinberg's principle, actually, there are some, it cannot always be a constant. So P square plus 2PQ plus Q square is equal to 1. It cannot always be equal to 1. It cannot remain a constant because there are various factors in the environment which can actually alter the Hardy-Weinberg's principle of equilibrium or equation. So what are those factors we shall look into? So one of the factors is gene migration or gene flow. Then it is genetic drift, it is big mutation, it is genetic recombination, it is natural selection. So in a population, all these factors will happen in a particular population which can lead to a alteration or which can affect the equilibrium of Hardy-Weinberg's principle. So let's learn about each of these one by one. Talking about gene migration or gene flow. So this happens. So from one particular population, say for example, there is a group of organisms in a particular forest where lots of abundant food were there, and because of drought or something, the food got scarce. So the organisms had to move or shift or migrate from that particular forest in which they were dwelling or from their habitat to a different habitat. Now when they go to a different habitat, they will mate with the organisms present in that particular habitat. Though they are of the same species, there will be slight variation in the organisms depending on the habitat, right? So therefore a new generation of progenies can be formed there, which are having a different set of genes than the actual parents. So that is one of such factors that affects the Hardy-Weinberg's principle, wherein it can alter or it can bring a hindrance to the consistency of Hardy-Weinberg's principle. So gene migration or gene flow. So when migration of a section of population to another place and population occurs, the gene frequency changes in the original as well as in the new population. So what happens? Or to the already existing population, from somewhere new alleles or genes are coming and getting adjusted there, wherein mating can happen and new progenies with new set of genes can develop, right? Because we get genes from both the mothers and the mother and the parent, depending on which is from both the mother and the father, depending on which is dominant there. And there would be a gene flow if this gene migration happens multiple times. So that is about gene migration and gene flow. So multiple occurrence of gene migration from because of migration from one population to another, it is called as gene flow. Say for example, we'll consider here population A and population B. So in population A, we have all the butterflies are white in color, and in population B, all the butterflies are pink in color. Now, because of some reason, few of the butterflies which were white in color, they moved to the population of pink butterfly. Now, only the color is different here, but the species is same. So, won't the mating happen if the mating happened between these two butterflies, next the progeny will have a different color, or it may have a mixture of colors. Can't say, right? This can alter the equilibrium principle of Hardy and Weinberg, wherein p square plus 2pq plus q square can no longer be equal to the constant 1. This is called as gene flow. Now, this is called as gene migration. If just gene migration happens multiple times from this population to this, or from this to this vice versa, then we call it as gene flow. So, therefore, gene migration or gene flow is one of the factors known to affect Hardy-Weinberg's equilibrium. Next is genetic drift. So, when migration of a section of population to another place and population occurs, gene frequency changes in its original as well as in the new population. It is called as genetic drift. Here, a group of organisms will either completely shift to a new habitat. So, when they shift to a new habitat, they will have to depend on the conditions of that particular habitat. So, over a period of time, they will develop new features to adapt to that particular habitat. So, that is also called as genetic drift. Or they will go to a new habitat. There, they will migrate with the organism of the same species in that particular habitat, again leading to evolution. So, this also affects Hardy-Weinberg's equilibrium. Say for example, here we have taken a section of a cow. So, a cow living in an area which is prone to volcano. So, because it is prone to volcano, these species, they have migrated to an area where maybe no volcanoes are happening. So, they need to get adjusted there. So, there also there are different species of cows that are present. And when they mate, they will give rise to a new set of populations. So, there also p square plus 2pq plus q square cannot be equal to 1 because there is the genetic drift, that is these genes are mixing with the genes of population B. Next is mutation. So, mutation can also cause a lot of alteration in the current species as well as the generation of the species. Microbial experiments show that the pre-existing advantageous mutations when selected will result in observation of new phenotypes. That is true, right? And over few generations, if this mutation continues or if the mutated gene gets carried to the new generation, then a new set of species can develop or a variation in that particular organism can happen. So, therefore, mutation is also one of the factors that can affect Hardy-Weinberg's equilibrium or principle. So with this, wherein we learnt about the mechanism of evolution, where different, that is Darwin and Hugo de Vries, their ideologies, and also we got to know about Hardy-Weinberg's principle and the factors which affect Hardy-Weinberg's principle, proving that the population frequency or the frequency of the gene pool in a particular population is not always a constant, and why it is not always a constant and what are the factors behind it we have also looked into. So in the coming session, we will learn about a brief account of evolution, wherein we'll mainly concentrate on the origin and evolution of man, like how did man evolve, that is the present day man evolve. So see you in the next session with this topic. Thank you.